Thank you, Richard. Hello, everybody. I'm quite happy to have this opportunity to share with you our first experience with the silicone gels on these beautiful paintings at Sulpice Church in Paris. The church is the largest church in Paris after Notre Dame, and Delacroix started his work in 1854 and accomplished his paintings in 1871, just 2 years before his death. And he decorated the entire chapel, so we have about 200 square meters of painting surface. Our team was made up of 10 conservators, and we started the restoration in October 2015 with a 4-month study phase followed by 8 months of conservation intervention, and we achieved the work in November 2016, so 1 year ago. A few words about the iconography. So on the ceiling, this is just before the restoration, of course. For the ceiling, Delacroix chose the scene of Saint Michael defeating the demon, who is surrounded by angels painted on the 4 spandrels. And then we have, on the east wall, we have Jacob wrestling with the angel, which is a very famous scene in this chapel. And on the west wall, we have Heliodorus chased from the temple. Both of the scenes are just after restoration. A few words about the painting technique, which was quite complex. We know quite well his work, the techniques, the manners of working of Delacroix from his journal. And we have a lot of publication, of course. He is the most famous painter, 19th century painter in France. And we know also 70 sketches created in preparation for this work. So the masonry ground was composed of limestone bricks with lime plaster grout. And the surfaces were chiseled to flatten the levels and even out the surfaces. And the stone was soaked with boiling linseed oil because Delacroix was worried about the moisture in the churches. So he just asked to soak the stone with boiling linseed oil, and then he covered it with 2 up to 4 layers of mixture of white lead barytes and oil. And all the layers are applied quite heterogeneously. Delacroix himself reworked several times, several places, and restructured his impressions by taking into account the motif and distribution of light in the scene. The marufridge canvas on the central part of the ceiling was glued down using a blend of oil and lead white. And the preparation of the canvas is composed of light white lead and oil and covered with a film of pure wax, which was applied probably by cauterization, which is local heating, intense heating. And the pictorial layer, so he used, which was quite normal for his technique, he used a binder made of beeswax and linseed oil, but they are not homogeneous neither, because they are either layered or mixed together. And also the consistency varied. Sometimes we have a thick layers, sometimes very, very diluted. And he used a standard oil colors, and he was quite obsessed about his palette, which he composed every day. And he used also some mineral pigments, but also the tints. And the cross-sections of several samples revealed the presence of numerous paint layers, up to 15. And some decorative parts were covered with gold leaf applied on an oil and resin ground layer. And he never varnished his paintings. He was against varnishing the mural paintings. Also, we had a lot of heterogeneous aspects of surfaces. The overall finish was a satin finish, but we have a lot of matte areas also. And then we have some impastos, a lot of impastos, and a lot of scratches and engravings which were done by Delacroix in fresh or dried paint. And we had also a lot of premature cracks due to his painting technique. The paintings were, of course, restored several times. We found the documentation mention of about 7 restorations. So the first one was held in the period very close to the execution of the painting. So it was 1895, like 30 years after the accomplishment of the paintings. And the last one, 1978. We don't have the reports, of course, we don't have the documentation, but we've taken some samples, a lot of samples, which show us that the ancient restoration used the products which were quite close to the original technique, so oil and natural varnishes. And the modern restoration introduced the modern material. So we had some natural resins, some shellac, some acrylic resins and ketone resins, and then some other things. The losses of adherence were treated many times, mostly with acrylic resins in recent times. The problem of conservation was the multiple flaking following the mortar lines in the masonry. And under the vault, the decorative parts have some problems linked to rising damp and soluble salt. And of course, all the surfaces were covered with a very, very thick layer of grime composed of many carbon-based materials as well as breakdown products from the masonry and mortars. The artist's personality and this especially long period of execution, which was 7 years, resulted in a work with extreme heterogeneity, which was discernible in all the strata from the deepest preparation layer to the pictorial layer. And this technical complexity, as well as all the restoration, made it a work that was quite difficult to treat. So the paintings were very sensitive to organic solvents and water because of the presence of a binder made from linseed oil and beeswax, which were also aged and broken up by past cleaning intervention. We had also to limit the mechanical action in order to avoid polishing the surfaces because of the beeswax also. We had to preserve the diverse aspects of surface with juxtaposed mud and shiny area, and we had to clean a surface with impasto effects and scratches, even in these engravings and scratches of Delacroix original scratches, without being abrasive. And we had also some glazed area and transparent layers, the area which are more fragile even. And finally, we had to take into account the interactions between products that might mobilize soluble salt, since the paintings were executed on the stone surface. We've done some technical examination and cleaning tests, of course. So samples, this analysis gave us the information on the original materials, or rather confirmed the Delacroix technique. And then some information about the restoration materials, which we didn't know because we didn't have the documentation. And of course, some observed damages like water content, identification and amount of salt and surface deposit. And then we asked Richard Wolbers, of course, to come to help us to find some good methods to clean these complex paintings. So he came several times during the project, and we've done some tests. And when we found the method, we have done the monitoring to evaluate the potential presence of cleaning product residue by FTIR. We also have done technical imaging, but we tried to do it before removal of grime, but the grime was so thick that it compromised observation and interpretation. So we've done it after the removal of the soil. And this combined information enabled mapping of the varnishes, glazing, and the overpaint area, especially from the last restorations. For the principle, we just found 4 principles we wanted to respect, which was, the first one was limited penetration in the deeper layer. So it was by this advanced saturation of the material pore, using a penetrating liquid with a retention time, which allowed us to work over a specific period of time without acting on the substrata, whilst removing the soil and without leaving residue, which was very, very important for us. We also wanted a product that would evaporate completely in the reasonable amount of time. And the silicone solvents tested were cyclic and linear low molecular weight dimethyl silicone. The ability not to cause damage to the paint surface was tested in advance, and they did not affect either the natural waxes or the oils. And the second principle was then application and contact with the gel. So the cleaning substances like aqueous solutions, organic solvents, chelates that act on the soil and other materials to be removed were applied using a gel whose composition was adapted to each need. And the gel helped to maintain surface contact without using a surfactant. And then the third principle was a control of the action of water. Since the need to use water has been demonstrated, we tailored its properties and control its action on the soil by buffering and controlling the pH, adjusting the conductivity to near isotonic to the paint surface, and using active substances such as chelates. Water alone, we know, can cause damage, and it's not efficient enough to reduce the soil. And the last principle was the possibility of modifying a mixture of active solvents. So if needed, gels can be prepared with a solvent or mixture of organic solvents with variable polarities in different proportions to enhance the capacity to solubilize substances from different chemical families like natural or synthetic resins. And I will show you a little film, and if I can, I hope it works. The film, it's there. It works, great. So you can see the beginning of the cleaning of the Heliodorus chased from the temple. So we start by saturating the pores with D4, octamethyl cyclotetrasiloxane, which retention time is 30 minutes, which gives us a lot of time to work on this small area, about 20 by 20 centimeters. And then we choose gel material without a surfactant, but with stable emulsifying properties, Velvesil Plus, which is a vinyl cross polymer. And it's a Pickering type emulsion, a type of emulsifier, and it does not form emulsion through a surfactant chemistry. And the soil analysis and first test led us to formulate this Pickering type emulsion that contained D2 silicone solvent and D5 also. And then you can see the proportion. So the gel was composed of 1 part of D2, 2 parts of Velvesil Plus, and 10% of aqueous phase made of demineralized water and citric acid and DTPA. So you can see that we're applying the gel with a supple brush, a little brush, and the gel becomes black immediately, so it takes off the surface, the soil, quite quickly. And of course, we adjusted the pH to 6 with sodium hydroxide solution, and we adapted the conductivity to that of the area to be cleaned. And we had a lot of differences between the conductivity on the wall. Some parts which were affected by the salt were completely different than the parts in good state, in good condition. And then after, now we are just removing the gel with physically from the surface. And then we will clear this gel with D2. So you can see the area which has been cleaned. We see the difference. But we still see some black spots in the pores of the painting, which no problem, because we can come back with the gel and we can apply several times the gel in the same area in order to remove all the soil, and there is no problem because we are protecting with D4 and then we just acting on the surface here on the soil. Okay. And then we had to, after this cleaning of soil on this 200 square meters area, we had to remove some varnishes, glazes, and overpaint. And then we used a gel which was composed of 1 part of D2 and 2 parts of Velvesil, like in the previous gel, but we didn't use the aqueous solution, but we replaced it with some benzyl alcohol, 5 to 15%. And then we had some shellac on the vaulted ceiling, on the spandrels, which was applied in some random manner. And the first 2 gels were not adequate. So we formed another gel which was prepared composed of xanthan gum dissolved in demineralized water, and then with 5% of triethanolamine and 5 to 10% of benzyl alcohol to form a stable emulsion. Conclusion. So this first experience with the silicon system on this monumental scale, on these fragile paintings, offered a solution which was really adapted to the problem of treating these paintings on porous material. And it was quite reassuring for us that the pictorial layers were protected by a D4 during the cleaning, and no active agent would penetrate the deep strata or modify the physicochemical properties of the original layers. We know all that cleaning with solvents, it's a quite risky procedure, and pure solvents. And it's quite difficult to distinguish or target layers, particularly when restoration materials are close to the original technique. We were also able to remove the surface soil without stripping wax or oily components from the paint film. And the silicon solvents are poor solubilizers of fatty acids and triglyceride materials in general. The emulsion also helped to limit the application and amount of aqueous phase brought to the paint surface. And there were surfactant-free emulsions, so it was very important for the aging of the painting of the material. And the application of this easy manipulated silicon and xanthan gels with a supple brush eliminates the abrasive action of cotton pad, cotton wool And also, we removed the soil without prior removal of dust. The silicon system allows to eliminate the surface layers progressively, and we obtain a very homogeneous result without any blanching. And we could also preserve some non-original glazes in a previously abraded area by these selective cleaning methods. The heterogeneous aspects of the original surface, this matte and glossy area, were perfectly respected. And which is very important for us, the conservators of murals, it's that we can adapt the composition of gels to the physico-chemical parameters of the surfaces. Since we can have high water and salt content on the wall. We have some questions and remarks. Since the silicon solvents are used in weak concentration in the cosmetic industry, no toxicity study was carried out on the prolonged exposure to large quantities of these materials. So we don't know if we have to protect ourselves in the particular way or not. Then we had some problems when working on the silicon-treated areas, some problems of readhesion of flaking. Of course, we've fixed them before cleaning, but we had to do it again in some area, and in this network of cracks, maybe we left some silicon solvent because we have some problems with adhesion. So we just rinse it again, and it worked. So I think we left some silicon, but we can also observe with UV light, and we can detect very easily the silicon residue on the surface because it's quite blue fluorescency. So sometimes we found little rest we haven't seen without this light, so we could just inspect the area and remove all the rest of silicon. And then we had some problems with the temperature because the melting point of D4 is 70.5. And when we started to work in winter time, the D4 crystallized in the bottles, and also once applied on the wall, it crystallized on the cold wall. So we add some fraction of D2, and it helped to minimize the inconvenience, but the mixture evaporates more quickly, of course. So we have to take it into account while planning the intervention. And then there is a problem with the procurement because the supply chain for large quantities does not really exist in France. We spent 3 months to try to get all the products. And there is also, we used, it's important I think, 200 liters of silicon solvents and 30 kilograms of Velvesil Plus. And we spent about 50,000 euros for it, so it's quite expensive also on the monumental scale. And then I want just to show you our current project, which is another Delacroix painting. I'm finishing. In another Parisian church, so I think it will be another silicon solvents, I think, or other gel project. And we will take Richard also with us, so he will help us to find the solution. Thank you for your attention.